Imagine dying because someone thought the weather was bad, or being buried alive because your boss had a really bad Monday, or getting pushed off a cliff because the mountain was allegedly hungry. Throughout history, humans have believed some truly bizarre things. But what makes these beliefs different is that people didn't just follow them. They died for them, willingly, violently, and sometimes screaming. These aren't metaphors or myths. These are documented historical practices where entire civilizations decided that death was the only logical solution to everyday problems. Welcome to the darkest corners of human belief, where logic went to die and people followed shortly after. Ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's eternal entourage. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a political leader. He wasn't even just a king. He was a living god, the physical embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed deity who protected the living and judged the dead. Every word he spoke was treated as divine law. Every decision he made was considered infallible. And when he died, well, that's when things got really interesting. You see, Egyptians believed that death wasn't an ending. It was more like a layover before the real journey began. The pharaoh's time on earth was just a waiting room, and the afterlife was his final destination, a place where he'd rule eternally among the gods. But to get there, he needed a vehicle. Enter the pyramid, essentially a 2.3 million block spiritual launch pad designed to catapult his soul into eternity. During construction, which could take 20 years or more, countless workers died. Some from exhaustion, working 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat. Others from construction accidents, falling from scaffolding or crushed beneath blocks that weighed as much as elephants. And a surprising number from what ancient records vaguely describe as unexplained gravitational events, which is basically ancient Egyptian for "we have no idea what happened, but he's definitely dead." When the pharaoh finally died, usually under circumstances that appeared suspiciously convenient to whoever wanted the throne next, preparations would begin immediately. His body underwent the world's most intensive spa treatment, cleaned, organs removed and stored in jars like ancient Tupperware, preserved with natron salt, perfumed with myrrh and cinnamon, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen, and decorated with amulets and gold. He would then be placed inside his giant triangle along with everything he loved in life. His food, carefully preserved for eternal snacking. His gold, because you can't buy your way into heaven without proper currency. His furniture, because eternal comfort matters. His weapons, in case the afterlife had hostile neighbors. And of course, his pet cats, because even in death, Egyptians refused to be separated from their feline overlords. But here's where it gets dark. Even with all his favorite things, a god king wasn't expected to make the trip alone. His servants needed to continue serving. His guards needed to continue guarding. His attendants needed to continue attending. And his wife? Well, she had signed up for "till death do us part," but apparently nobody told her which death they were talking about. These people were expected to follow him into eternity. Some went willingly, believing it was the highest honor imaginable. Others were given a choice that wasn't really a choice. Volunteer for eternal glory, or be branded a coward and watch your family lose everything. To the ancient Egyptians, this was seen as the ultimate display of loyalty and devotion. A sacred duty, the greatest sacrifice one could make. But let us be honest, nothing beats being buried alive next to your boss because he believed in really aggressive employee retention policies. Early Egyptian tombs show evidence of retainer sacrifice, where dozens of servants were killed and buried alongside their masters. As Egyptian civilization evolved, they eventually figured out they could just bury statues instead, which was significantly more cost-effective and resulted in way fewer workplace safety complaints. Ancient India, the Sati ritual. Ancient India, land of spices, silk, mathematical innovations, and one of the most horrifying marriage traditions ever conceived. Among the Rajputs, a warrior caste of noble families who ruled kingdoms across northern India, marriage wasn't viewed as a partnership between equals. It was a binding contract, a permanent arrangement, a deal you literally couldn't escape, even in death. When a Rajput wife died first, her body was cremated according to Hindu tradition. The husband would mourn. He'd perform the necessary rituals. He'd grieve for an appropriate period, maybe a few weeks if he really liked her. And then, as was socially acceptable, he'd begin the process of finding a new wife to manage his household, raise his children, and continue the family line. But if the husband died first? That's when a custom called Sati would activate. Sati, from the Sanskrit word meaning good woman or true wife, was the practice of a widow proving her eternal devotion by joining her husband on his funeral pyre. Alive, conscious, fully aware of what was about to happen. This wasn't presented as a punishment. It was marketed as an honor, the highest form of spiritual devotion. A woman who performed Sati was praised as a goddess. Her name would be remembered. Songs would be written about her courage. Temples would be built in her honor. The catch? She had to burn to death to earn those accolades. If a widow refused, the backlash was immediate and brutal. Priests would declare her spiritually impure. In-laws would claim she had cursed the family with her selfishness. Neighbors would whisper that her refusal proved she never truly loved her husband. The social pressure was suffocating, relentless, and designed to break her will. But if persuasion failed, if a widow still refused to voluntarily climb onto the burning logs, the ritual suddenly stopped looking spiritual and started looking a lot more like an execution. Historical records describe widows being drugged with opium to make them compliant, being tied to the funeral pyre so they couldn't escape once the flames started, being pushed back into the fire by family members with long poles when they inevitably tried to flee the unbearable agony. And here's the part nobody wanted to say out loud. Sati was economically convenient. Under traditional inheritance laws, a widow had the right to her husband's property. She could manage the estate, make decisions, control resources. But if she died on the funeral pyre, everything went to the male relatives, the in-laws, the brothers, the sons who were now free from maternal authority. To the Rajputs, a woman stepping onto those burning logs was seen as the ultimate act of wifely devotion and spiritual purity. Conveniently, it also guaranteed her in-laws would inherit everything she owned. Ancient equality at its finest. The practice continued for centuries until the British colonial government, appalled by what they were witnessing, officially banned Sati in 1829. Reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy fought tirelessly to end the custom, arguing that it was murder disguised as religious devotion. But even after the ban, cases continued. The last documented case occurred in 1987, when an 18-year-old widow named Rup Kunwar died on her husband's funeral pyre in Rajasthan. Whether she went willingly or was coerced remains disputed to this day. If you're enjoying this journey through humanity's darkest traditions, hit that like button. And if you're not enjoying it, well, at least you're not being pressured to climb onto a funeral pyre, so your day is going better than theirs. The Kingdom of Dahomey. Messaging the ancestors in the Kingdom of Dahomey, located in what is now modern-day Benin, ancestors weren't viewed as distant memories or spiritual concepts you prayed to on special occasions. They were considered active officials in an invisible government that still ran the show from beyond the grave. When the king needed to send them an update about recent victories, political changes, or important decisions, he didn't pray. He didn't meditate. He didn't write it in a journal and hope his ancestors were psychically eavesdropping. He sent a messenger, a real, living, breathing person whose job description had one major downside. The position was extremely permanent. This process was known as Shipa Nua, which literally translates to send a person. The ritual would begin with a prisoner of war being dragged before the royal throne, usually someone captured from a neighboring kingdom during one of Dahomey's frequent military campaigns. The king would then give him a message to memorize. It might be simple. Tell my grandfather we won the war against the Oyo Empire. Or it might be complex. Inform my great-great-grandfather that I've expanded trade routes, married 3 new wives, and require his blessing for the upcoming harvest festival. Also, tell him I'm still angry about that land dispute from 1743. The messenger would be required to repeat the message back, word for word, until the king was satisfied he had memorized it perfectly. After all, you wouldn't want your eternal ancestors receiving garbled information because your messenger had poor memory retention. From there was only one final step: actually sending the messenger on his way. Once his spirit was separated from his body through ritual execution, he would be instantly transported to the afterlife, where he was expected to locate the Council of Ancestors and deliver the memo. Think of it as ancient email, except instead of clicking send, they clicked sacrifice, and the message couldn't be marked as spam. While a single message could be handled by one messenger, it created a logistical problem. One messenger was fine for urgent updates, But the ancestors needed more than that. They required servants, attendants, entertainment, and a steady stream of information about the living world. So once a year, during the massive celebration known as Swatanu, the kingdom would gather enemy soldiers, captured prisoners, criminals, and social outcasts for one mass personnel transfer event. Hundreds would be permanently relocated in a single day. Some carried messages. Others were sent as gifts to keep the ancestors happy and well-staffed. The ceremony lasted for days, involved elaborate rituals, music, dancing, and ended with the ancestors receiving what amounted to an entire corporate workforce delivered in bulk. European travelers who witnessed these ceremonies were horrified, describing them as barbaric mass murder. But to the people of Dahomey, this wasn't cruelty. It was religious duty, cosmic maintenance, a necessary transaction to keep the universe in balance and ensure the kingdom's prosperity. The ancestors needed their daily briefings, and someone had to deliver them. Ancient logistics at its finest. Ancient Tibet, feeding the mountain gods high on the vast, unforgiving Tibetan Plateau, where oxygen is thin and survival is brutal. The ancient Bon religion held a terrifying core belief that shaped their entire worldview. The world was full of hungry, powerful mountain gods. These weren't benevolent deities you could bargain with through prayer or offerings of grain. These were primal forces that demanded human sustenance to maintain the sacred cosmic order. According to Bon cosmology, these gods weren't evil. They were simply hungry, and their hunger could destabilize reality itself. If they weren't fed regularly, they would grow angry. Mountains would collapse. Rivers would flood. Crops would fail. Entire communities would be destroyed. To prevent this apocalyptic divine hunger from destroying the world, communities performed a ritual known as Lud. And it had one very simple purpose: to launch a human sacrifice skyward to keep the gods quiet and the universe intact. The chosen recipient for this grim theological duty was never a valued community member. It was always a captive from a rival tribe, a criminal who had violated sacred laws, or a social outcast whose disappearance wouldn't cause political complications. These individuals were considered spiritually lightweight, easy for the gods to haul into the next world. Their souls were believed to be more digestible, more acceptable as divine sustenance. But really, it was just a convenient way to eliminate undesirables, dispose of enemies, and maintain social order while claiming cosmic necessity. A theological cleanup program for the greater cosmic good. The victim would first undergo ritual purification. They'd be washed, dressed in ceremonial cloth, and given sacred herbs to consume. Priests would chant prayers to prepare their soul for its journey to the mountain gods. Then they'd be escorted to the edge of a sacred cliff overlooking the valley thousands of feet below. The location was carefully chosen, always a place where the wind howled and the mountains seemed to watch with ancient, hungry eyes. The priest, being stoic, efficient, and never one to miss a divine delivery window, would then speak final prayers and push the offering forward, sending them over the cliff's edge into the abyss. And just like that, the world was saved. The gods were satisfied, the community was secure, and the village was conveniently rid of whoever they decided was expendable. Ancient airmail at its finest, with a guaranteed one-way delivery. When Buddhism arrived in Tibet around the 7th century, these practices were gradually suppressed and reinterpreted. The new religion taught compassion for all living beings, which made human sacrifice somewhat problematic from a theological standpoint. But the transition wasn't immediate. For centuries, isolated communities in remote mountain regions continued the practice in secret, believing that abandoning it would anger the old gods and bring disaster. Ancient Greece. The oracle's deadly predictions in ancient Greece. Nothing was more trusted and more feared than the Oracle of Delphi. Kings traveled across mountains to consult her. Generals delayed battles to hear her prophecies. Farmers sacrificed their best livestock just to ask a single question about next year's harvest. And whatever she said, people obeyed, no matter how insane it sounded. The oracle wasn't just any priestess. She was the Pythia, the mouthpiece of Apollo, the Greek god of truth, prophecy, music, and all things related to knowing the future before it happened. To deliver these prophecies, the Pythia would sit on a tripod above a crack in the earth from which volcanic vapors rose. Modern geologists believe these vapors contained ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas that produces a euphoric, trance-like state. Basically, She was getting high on divine fumes and declaring the results to be cosmic truth. Her words were often cryptic, deliberately vague, and open to multiple interpretations. When King Croesus of Lydia asked whether he should attack Persia, the oracle told him, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus assumed she meant the Persian Empire. He attacked. He lost catastrophically. His own empire fell. The oracle was technically correct, which is the most infuriating kind of correct. But here's where it gets dark. When the oracle warned that disaster was coming, people didn't just prepare. They looked for someone to blame. And then they killed that person to appease the gods. When a plague hit Athens in 430 BCE, killing thousands and devastating the city, leaders didn't invest in public health measures or quarantine procedures. They decided the gods were angry and needed a life to reset the cosmic balance. Someone had to die to make things right. Usually a criminal, sometimes a prisoner of war, occasionally just whoever drew the short stick in the world's deadliest lottery. When Sparta faced military defeat, generals would consult the oracle, who would declare that the war god Ares required a human offering to grant victory. A young warrior would be chosen, ritually killed, and his blood offered on the altar. If Sparta won the battle, the sacrifice worked. If they lost anyway, clearly the gods wanted more. When crops failed and famine threatened, entire villages would gather to select an unlucky volunteer to restore harmony with the agricultural deities. These victims were often chosen by drawing lots, the ancient equivalent of a deadly raffle where one wrong stone meant congratulations, you've just been elected tribute by the universe. But the darkest part? People didn't just lose others to these beliefs. They volunteered themselves. Before major battles, some warriors would offer their own lives to the gods, convinced their death would guarantee victory for their comrades. They'd walk calmly to the altar, allow priests to slit their throats, and die believing they'd just purchased divine favor for their city-state. And if the battle still went horribly wrong after the sacrifice? Well, clearly the gods wanted more. The solution to failed human sacrifice was always additional human sacrifice. To the Greeks, death wasn't random or meaningless. It was a transaction, a deal struck with the divine powers that controlled fate. Give them a life, and maybe, just maybe, they'd give you a future worth living. The cost of belief, from Egypt's pyramids to Tibet's mountains, all these cultures shared a common idea. When the world falls apart, when crops fail, when wars are lost, when the gods seem angry, someone has to pay the price. Someone has to balance the cosmic ledger. Sometimes it was a king, surrounded by his servants for eternity. Sometimes it was a widow, forced onto a funeral pyre to prove devotion she may not have felt. Sometimes it was a prisoner, sent to deliver messages to ancestors who may not have been listening. Sometimes it was a social outcast, pushed off a cliff to feed gods who may not have been hungry. And sometimes it was just the random person standing nearby when society decided it needed a sacrifice. These practices seem barbaric to us now. We look back with horror at civilizations that normalized human sacrifice, that treated death as a solution to agricultural problems, that believed burning widows alive was spiritually enlightening. But here's the uncomfortable truth. These weren't primitive savages. These were sophisticated civilizations with complex governments, impressive architecture, advanced mathematics, beautiful art, and rich philosophical traditions. They were us, just separated by a few thousand years and different beliefs about how the universe works. We like to think we've evolved beyond these practices, and in many ways, we have. We don't burn widows or push people off cliffs or bury servants alive with dead kings. But we still sacrifice people to our beliefs. We just do it differently now. We sacrifice soldiers to national security. We sacrifice workers to economic growth. We sacrifice future generations to present convenience. The methods change. The justifications evolve. But humanity's willingness to trade human life for abstract concepts? That remains remarkably consistent. These ancient practices teach us something important. Beliefs have consequences. When we stop questioning traditions, when we accept practices just because that's how we've always done it, when we prioritize abstract ideas over human suffering, we're walking the same path these civilizations walked. The only difference is we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look back and recognize the horror for what it was. The question is, what will future generations say about us? In the end, Every single one of these cultures found a way to turn fear into tradition, tradition into ritual, and ritual into a body count. They believed they were doing the right thing. They believed they were serving the gods, honoring the dead, and maintaining cosmic order. They were wrong, but at least they didn't forget to hit the subscribe button. Don't make their mistake. Learn from history. Subscribe, like, comment with which ancient belief horrified you most. And remember, humanity has always been creative at justifying terrible things. The real evolution isn't in what we believe, it's in whether we're willing to question those beliefs before someone has to die for them. Ancient logic at its finest. Modern wisdom, hopefully, will be better,